Hello, I'm Bill Ide, and today we're going to talk about ESG. At the end of the 20th century, Peter Drucker, who in many ways shaped the modern business corporation, predicted that the greatest challenge for the 21st century would be dealing with the publics of business. And today's ESG challenges shows he was absolutely right. In the early 2000s, board focuses solely on stock price, and that's what the way to go. But look where we are today. Today, the boards are being called upon and companies being called upon under their fiduciary duties to look at things from a stakeholder point of view. And the Business Roundtable a few years ago confirmed that it's not only the stockholder, but it's also the customer, it's also the employee, it's also the communities. And the way some of this happened is WorldCom, Enron, the financial failures, the 2008 financial meltdown produced federal laws and produced Delaware case law that puts much more responsibility on companies to manage their risk and be accountable for the risk. And the investment community followed. And that's how ESG started cropping up in various forms. Cybersecurity lapses, privacy concerns were added to that list. And then along came COVID. What COVID did was it took trends in society that may have been a 5-year trend and accelerated into a 5-month trend. And we had George Floyd and diversity inclusion, mandatory vaccinations, how do you manage pandemics, employee pressures to speak out on societal issues. All that is cascading every day into companies, and under the label of ESG, the company's being asked to manage that. Climates, fires, floods, and looming threats have even accelerated that. And so today investors are using the ESG label to demand that companies prove that they're aware of the risk relevant to them, they are managing the risk relevant to them, and that they will have prosperity and long-term survival. And today we have 3 outstanding chief legal officers who are going to share with you their perspectives of what ESG means in real terms. What's it mean to the companies? How do you manage it? What's it mean to the investors? Their bios are in your materials. And as you will hear, ESG varies greatly by company size, by industry, and by business model. Jen Hightower of Cox Enterprises will now share her views. She'll be followed by Paul Gilbert of Rite Aid and then Todd Shelton of the Pulte Group. And then we'll have a wrap-up group discussion. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. And thank you for including me today. It is such an interesting topic because ESG is the buzz in the legal community, as in what is ESG? And from my perspective, I represent a family-owned, privately held company. So to give a little bit of context because I think it'll help understand the narrative you're going to hear from 3 different speakers. The company I represent is a 100-year-old family company, and it's in essence a conglomerate. It started as a paper, as a media company, and then moved into telephone, and then into radio. Television, radio, then into cable. And then we went into a whole other sector of the auto industry. And the company does everything in the auto space besides manufacturing and direct sales. We do retail sales. We don't do OEM type work. But now we are trying to move into a new area of growth. And that's where we see ESG really playing into our core values, because the company is very intrigued with sustainability. It's part of the company's cultural narrative. It's part of the family's narrative. They are an amazing family that's very committed to the earth. And they also are very committed to growth and to doing the right thing. So for me, ESG is part of the culture of the company. Being a private company, I don't have the same regulations that a public company has to adhere to from the SEC and or the guidance. When I say regulations, that's actually a loose term because we're still looking for, I think, some clarity in regulations. But for me, ESG is really part of the culture of the company. And so how do I, as a lawyer and the legal leader, support our ESG efforts from ensuring that we do what we say we're going to do? Because to us, ESG is, what I said, part of our cultural fabric. Our company's mantra is do the right thing, leave the world in a better place. And we have a company initiative called Cox Impact, which is what we call 34 by 34, which is improving the lives of 34 million people by the year of 34. Those are all really big goals, but they are things that we firmly are committed to. And to me, that is part of ESG at Cox, because in my role as a lawyer, I have to ensure that we can meet those commitments that we're saying as our cultural values. So we can't have risks, we can't have loss, we can't have issues that undermine what we've said to the world is what's important to Cox. It's also really important for us to meet these ESG objectives because we are very interested in growing in the world of sustainability. We also are very interested in being a company that other people want to engage with and have us invest in. So we're marketing ourselves to investors in a sense of, look who we are. We're a good company. We want you, we want to do business with you, which means back to ESG, we have to be true to our principles. So for me, the challenge in the ESG space is ensuring that we are doing what we say we're doing, and also ensuring that we uphold our reputation, because the reputational risk is the biggest concern for any company. So what that's all of the challenge for me as the lawyer is it's all a tad bit vague. It's a tad bit, it's very idealistic, but at the same time, it's what we've stated ourselves to be. So we have a challenge of meeting measurables, of proving what we're doing, giving the data to do that. And transparently, the ESG space is constantly evolving. We to remain relevant, we do a materiality survey biannually to make sure what we are focusing on is truly what is sustainable and what is relevant from an ESG perspective. And I have not seen many issues that are raised on that materiality survey that aren't relevant. So the objectives that we're working towards keep growing and compounding. They don't come off the list. More and more things are being added to the list. The other thing I'd say is challenging as a private held company or family owned company is, for us, this is supposed to be part of our culture and our fabric. So we literally expect the entire Cox employee base to be supportive of this, and they are. But it's hard to hold who's the person accountable to make sure we're meeting that requirement. We view that more as a cultural issue. So that's something that I just, as a lawyer, I have to work on to ensure that it really is something that not only is it cultural, but it's also part of the risk environment. And we meet we examine the risk and we ensure we mitigate any risk so that we don't undermine the values that we say that we're living to. It's going to be an interesting thing for me to honestly hear from Paul and Todd, because they represent different companies and they live in a little bit more of a regulatory regime. And I can say from my perspective, I almost hope there is a little bit more clarity from government, from regulators on what is truly the measurable stakes from an ESG perspective. But I'm going to turn it over to Paul to see if he disagrees or agrees with me on that.
Well, thanks, Jen, and Bill. Thank you for having me. Boy, you've put to me a tough question that I'll try to answer towards the end, but it's one that I think we all struggle with, regardless of what company or what industry we're in. Let me back up maybe one step, at least from my perspective, and talk about all of these terms that fly around: ESG, sustainability, more recently climate. Are those all different things? I spend time sometimes wondering and asking myself, or is it really sort of one bucket full of the same things that are all a little bit different? And the reason that is important to me, I think, is in an organization with so many moving parts, and that has been around for so long, it maybe is easy to get siloed around these issues. It's, the ERM, or the enterprise risk management function, may think they should have the largest role. The public relations group or investor relations group may think that they should have the largest role here to tell the story of what good things the company is committed to and to doing. Legal may think they have the biggest role. Compliance. Other functions, may think they are responsible for and should lead. And that's not necessarily a problem until you actually try to understand what the rules are and what you're going to commit to and what you're going to do. And that's why I think it's really important, as a very basic matter, to look beyond these definitions and think of the broader concept as one big thing. And it's, I mean, frankly, my view of what it is very similar to what Jen described. It's thinking about the organization, doing the right thing, cultural leadership, and at a very basic level, complying with law. So let me sort of get into the detail, at least of my view. ESG is and should be driven first by compliance with law and an analysis and understanding of risks faced by the company or presented by the company to third parties, like in the climate context. If you start with an appreciation or a commitment, which I hope we all have, I'm sure we all do, to follow the laws and to do the right thing, which is more of a cultural element, then I think you satisfy, although you should always work to improve those efforts, you should always work to improve your compliance program and how it's integrated with risk and enterprise risk management. At the core of all of this is compliance with law. So if you think about, at least as I think about how the board has developed and how the governance aspect of this ESG question has developed, not too long ago, boards focused on hiring the right CEO, hiring and firing the right CEO, and what their relationship with management should look like. Then, for a lot of reasons Bill mentioned, I remember Ford Pinto, I didn't live through it, but I remember that being a case law, and certainly Enron was one of those developments. Boards got more interested in things like compliance programs and oversight of compliance programs, and oversight, frankly, of the business decisions that were being made on a values basis. And so that to me started us down this path of governance being kind of a foundation for all of this, with boards leading and showing interest, either because they had to by law or because they were interested because of their strong ethical and moral compass and their leadership. They were interested in how these questions were being answered by the management team. How was that balance of the Ford Pinto, that risk of death versus what the fix would have caused? How are those kinds of questions at an extreme being answered? And so I think the board forms the foundation still today of how these questions and how these issues get framed up for the corporation. For us, across all of those definitions I gave you at the start, sustainability is probably the big issue. And it's sustainability as a company first. So we are a turnaround. We are, in some people's perspective, we're somewhat distressed. We are a company that is implementing a new business model and moving away from our historical sort of focus on retail pharmacies. We're really trying to move into new ground and to pivot slightly while staying as a leading pharmacy company. And through that pivot, the question is, can the company survive that pivot, and can it thrive following that pivot? So when we hear from investors, it's most often, how are you doing financially and where are you guys going to land? And before you focus on all of these other things, we want to make sure that you have a plan to survive, to truly be a sustainable organization. And then we hear, so that's important. That's the message we hear from our investors. And that's an important one. The message we hear from other stakeholders, communities, our employees and associates, third parties who have an interest in various issues that arise in the pharmacy area. We're pushed, and I think in a healthy way, to think about things we can do on the range of issues, the range of social issues, the range of environmental issues, climate issues that go beyond the minimum. And that's where, for us, it becomes a series of choices about where we're going to make investments, where those issues can tie into our strategy or do tie into our strategy, and therefore make sense, from our perspective at least, to pursue and put resources behind and to think about operationalizing. And so that choice that permeates, I think, all of these questions. How do we take the resources we have and apply them against all of these issues and in a way that makes the most sense for the organization and that frankly makes the most sense to our stakeholders, including employees and communities and stockholders, is where the rubber sort of meets the road for us in ESG. And I think that's also where companies and boards and investors have to decide, what is it, where is it, where can we make the biggest difference, given the resources we have, given the challenges we face? Will it be in climate? And I'll tell you, there is tremendous pressure to do your part, whatever that means in climate. And if you're an energy company, that means something very different than if you're, say, a law firm or a services company. I mean, those two are fundamentally different organizations and they have different responsibilities, but everybody is expected today to do their part and their appropriate part in climate. And you know you're going to have these minimum obligations that are going to be hopefully very closely monitored by a robust compliance program, and you're going to understand risk. Where else do you go, and where is your strategy? Where can you have the biggest impact? I think is the question that you always come back to. And to me, Rite Aid, as a pharmacy company, as a pharmacy services company, and a retail pharmacy, we can have the biggest impact on issues like health outcomes, like associate development, DE&I, where we already have had a tremendous impact if you look at our refreshed board. And so of all the topics and of all the variables that live within all of those definitions I start with, I think our choice beyond mere compliance and mere robust compliance is to tie the elements where we can make the biggest difference into our strategy, focus our resources on those areas, and then really make a difference, make a measurable difference. And I think I make that point hopefully clearly, because I think we also have moved in the last few years from an environment where it was okay to tell your story or talk about your story. Here are the great things we're doing in this area, this ESG sort of marketing blitz from my perspective. And I'm not talking here just about Rite Aid, or frankly, I'm not talking about Rite Aid at all. But my perception that many companies were really good about talking about ESG, but weren't necessarily making changes, weren't really necessarily having an impact. And I think where it is today is you absolutely have to be making a measurable impact. And then you have to be able to prove it, which is why it needs to be measurable, because we know those rules that Jen mentioned are coming. We know they're coming in part from the SEC. We think they are coming in part from outside organizations, SASB and other international groups that are working to provide standards against disclosures that we make. But more important really than those rules is, are you actually doing the work? That's a question we get from our associates. We get it from our customers. We get it from third parties interested in specific issues. We get it from our board of directors constantly, because they continue to be leaders here. And so through all of the noise and all of the initials, for us, I think I constantly push us to challenge where we can make the biggest difference, commit our resources there, make sure we're operationalizing those matters, make sure we're measuring them, and make sure we're actually getting it done. So hopefully that is helpful in some way, Todd. Maybe not to you, but hopefully somebody out there. So I'll turn it to you at this point.
Thanks, Paul. Well, it is helpful for me because it's helpful to know that there are other people outside my industry not only facing the same challenges, but really with the same perspective. And I think you summarized what certainly public companies and corporations' roles are with respect to this. When you have so many different rating agencies, stakeholders, all asking for sometimes different things, sometimes the same things, but packaged in a different way to us. How do we sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and really make the right decisions? And it's to go through the process you talked about, Paul, which is figuring out what makes the most sense for our stakeholders where we are, what makes the most sense for our business, and where can we have the greatest impact for those stakeholders. So just a little background on me and my company. I'm general counsel for the Pulte Group. We are a nationwide production home builder. So we'll build and deliver probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 new homes to people in America today across 25 states and 45 major metropolitan areas. So our business is really 5 different things. We buy land, we develop it into communities, we build houses mostly through third-party trade contractors, then we sell them, and then we finance them. So we have a mortgage company as well. So we see the whole life cycle from start to finish. And give you a little background on sort of the public company GC's perspective. We've always been, or at least I've always been, here and in my prior roles, sort of on the forefront of the discussions with our institutional investors around ESG. It's just, 10 years ago, they weren't necessarily calling it that, and the focus was primarily on governance issues. So when we spoke to our institutional investors with the big ones, the BlackRocks, the Fidelities, the Vanguards, the State Streets, they were focused on, making sure that our governance, classified boards, proxy access, those sorts of things were met their definition of shareholder friendly. And that was a lot of it until, middle part of the last decade. And then the S came more into play, where institutional investors were much more focused and started to ask questions about diversity, particularly board diversity, both gender and ethnicity. And that was something that I think a lot of public company boards started to work on, and is what institutional investors were asking on the S side. And then around 2020 or so, the E side started to come more into play, particularly for those companies that weren't necessarily talking about that. And to the point Bill made in his introduction, I think some of us thought that COVID would maybe tap the brakes on the environmental and sustainability focus of some of our institutional shareholders. And instead, it really accelerated their focus in that area. And you look at what the larger institutional shareholders are saying today, especially with respect to the E and ESG, is that climate change is an intrinsic threat to our future as a society. And what they want is they want companies to, in essence, and this gets back to your point, Paul, tell their story, of what is important to them as a company and where they can make the most impact. Because particularly in this country, governments change every 2 or 4 years. And, one of the, blessings and curses of our great democratic society is that, we get to elect new leaders, and they have different policies and different practices. But corporations employ the majority of people in the United States. And, if we share our institutional shareholders' perspective with respect to the threats and the impact of climate change, then we should tell that story as part of good governance. So it's that link between environmental sustainability and governance. Any company from their perspective that isn't factoring in sustainability and climate change into their operations, probably doesn't have otherwise good governance, good operations, and is not overall a sustainable enterprise. I've been fortunate here at our company because, we've been doing a lot of these things. They're intrinsic, and a lot of what we're doing as part of our ESG process is, trying to do a better job of just showing our math, telling our story about what we do in ways that answer our stakeholders questions. The loudest for us are certainly the institutional shareholders, but our customers are asking questions. The communities we want to build in and develop are asking questions about who we are as a corporate citizen. And probably the other loudest voice are our employees. In this day and age, people who come and want to work for a company, particularly those who are coming out of school today or over the last few years, they want to know what a company stands for. And it is a significant consideration in where they choose to work and where they choose to continue to work as well. And that's been something that I think is extremely encouraging to us. As far as the SEC requirements and the other people telling us how to report, I think those are challenges that we as general counsel are going to have to navigate through over the next few years. What we've tried to do is, to the extent we can, and to the extent required reporting, either voluntary through SASB, which Paul mentioned, or other third parties, where we have the data that makes sense, we do it. When we pick our metrics and targets and the things that are most important to our business, they will definitely overlap with some of the SASB standards, and that's a process we're going through right now. So, but at the end of the day, I go back to the point that Jennifer made. ESG is an outgrowth of your company's culture, and it's part of telling the story. And I think all of us as public companies or private companies believe, we have a meaningful role to play in driving positive change for all of our stakeholders. And that's why, some of the requirements for ESG, sometimes you scratch your head, you roll your eyes, and from a legal perspective, you worry about whether or not you can do some of the stuff in the SEC disclosure. But at the end of the day, it's not the worst work we do, because we know we're a significant part of moving our company's commitment to our stakeholders forward.
Thanks, Todd. There's excellent points by everybody. I had a program like this recently, and the general counsel GM was on, and he gave the example of, you all have talked about strategy and then operational. From the strategic point of view, GM had tremendous pressures that you're not going to be relevant if you don't move over to electronic, get away from carbon, but because people are going to be driving EMV, they're not going to be driving carbon. So there's a strategic question, but it also ties into climate, and but climate probably produced that outcome. But and we've got a limited amount of time. But one thing I want to just ask each of you to reflect on for a minute, you've done an outstanding job, is the studies show now that business is viewed by society as the most credible to solve problems. The political gridlock is just unfortunately reduced the political system to lack of trust. And so the ESG piles on more and more on you all, because there are societal problems where business is now asked to get involved. And there's a delicate balance, you all have alluded to it, of when does the company speak out? The employees want one thing and the shareholders may want another. One of the interesting things that's happening is rule of law issues are now coming to the fore, like voting and et cetera. So if you're an investor, you're watching these dynamics and you're watching this. And some of the investors are advocates, they're impact funds, et cetera, like that. But where do you see this settling down? Or I think maybe your answer is I just got to put one step in front of the others we talked about. But let me just ask each of you to sort of, as we wrap this up, to sort of, what's your view of where we are as sort of, if you're an investor and looking at this dynamic, and because I think you've answered what you think you need to be doing, but where's this going to land? And I know that's a wide open amorphous question, but so we'll go in reverse order. So I'll go Todd, then Paul, and then Jen.
Thanks for calling me on first for this one, Bill. Appreciate it. I have no idea where it's going to land. The political environment in this country, feels as bad as it ever has in my lifetime. And, outside of work, I worry about it a lot. In my job as general counsel of a public company, I worry about navigating my company through it as best we can. We take the approach that actions speak louder than words. We try and live our values every day where we need to, and where a change in law impacts something with respect to an employee in a particular state. We'll work with that employee to help manage around that at the end of the day. Political winds change, and I hope at the end of the day, we'll be able to have more direct conversations as companies. But right now, for a lot of companies, you speak to our peers, Bill, at other companies, and I think this is unique, something that has come up over the last 4 or 5 years. There's real operational risk to taking a position on certain things, and I think that's something that we as general counsel advise on and craft our words carefully. We all do that, but at the end of the day, we do what is right for our stakeholders, and for us, that's employees first, and then customers follow.
Yeah, that's agree with all of that. It's a tough environment, and I would say this one is particularly hard in terms of speaking on issues, because I feel like we've been whipsawed back and forth, expectations versus now risk in doing so, which we've seen play out really clearly in a couple of high-profile instances on the risk side. Having said that, I do think corporations and the leaders within corporations have a role to play here on behalf of their stakeholders, and I think we'll continue to do that. For us, it's important to have a framework, or for me, it's important to have a framework in mind when I get asked this question, or when we're ready to make a statement, or at least a part of the organization is ready to make a statement, and we have to sort of slow down and think about it. I approach it and think about it as, okay, how direct is that issue to our mission, to our purpose? What's the business impact of it? So assuming it's very related to our purpose, what's the business impact? Can we make a difference by speaking out? Will our voice be heard? Will it matter to anybody? And then what do our stakeholders think? What would they want us to say? Is it clear what they would want us to say? Or is this an issue that is so divisive that we can't really know what any majority would say? And I think we're going to continue to use that framework on the risky issues. We have been vocal on social issues where I think it has made clear sense to do that. Where the country is more divided, I think we're a little more attuned to the risk that could result.
So I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to say I think it's a great question. It's going to be one we're all going to be involved in working with. I mean, and I really do completely align with what Todd and Paul said. The challenge I have from Cox's perspective, I said it sincerely, like our company mantra is do the right thing. And that's broad, but it's like ingrained. That's what we say, and we mean it. So for me, environmental issues are like a no-brainer. We are like totally committed in the environmental space. We're totally committed in the diversity space. Transparently, we were we took a leading stand in like the vaccination space with the COVID because we felt that was the right thing for the world. That was controversial. I mean, that did not sit overwhelmingly well with their entire employee population. So that's something we've had to acknowledge, that I think truthfully, when it comes to political issues, we are well aware that we have a very large workforce and they're split on a lot of issues. So not that we won't take a position, but I would say we're going to make sure we take a position when we know it's the right thing for the world. And if things are truly 50-50, we're also going to have to modulate and make sure that we are aligned with what our stakeholders which is our local communities, our employees, our shareholders, and our customers agree with. So we're having to be, I have to be very intentional that what my personal perspective is maybe not what the company's personal perspective is. So I would say from a DC role, that's the biggest challenge for me, to be mindful that my obligation is to the company and to the company's role holistically. But I do think it's a great question that we're all going to have to continue to think about, because I think corporations are going to be the leaders in this space. So I think unfortunately we'll continue to be talking about this.
Well, thank you all. And one thing I'll add is the American bar and legal profession is working real hard to make a difference between political questions and democratic values. And so I think that's one of the key things. And the former general counsel Boeing, Judge Luddick, testified on January 6th about his concern for democratic values. So that's something that I hope we lawyers in our legal organization work on. But thank you all very much. It's been a terrific conversation, and we very much appreciate it. And so I think with that, we're adjourned, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.